Welcome everybody, and thank you for attending this OASPA webinar, which we're holding today in conjunction with the Make Data Count initiative. I can appreciate that as a Zoom participant, it can feel like you're the only one here, but I can assure you, you're definitely not. We've had over 200 people register, and normally over half of those attend, so you'll be in good company today. And registrations for this event are from all continents of the world and nearly 200 different organisations, including academic libraries, all different kinds of publishing organisations, government funding and non-profit organisations. So as Bernie says, please do say hello in the chat and let us know where you're from. Thank you to Copyright Clearance Centre for hosting today's webinar for us, and to Chloe especially for keeping the show running so expertly as always. The support we get from CCC enables OASPA to make all of our webinars free to join, and you can see past topics and access all of the recordings via our website, oaspa.org, and we'll have this recording on our site too as soon as possible afterwards. So in today's session, I'll start by giving some background, and then we have some great speakers who will give presentations, which will follow with a panel discussion and some questions after that. So OASPA is an organisation which has a mission to advance open access and make that the predominant model for scholarly outputs. But we're a very diverse community of organisations centred around open scholarship across all disciplines, journals, books and infrastructure. And as an organisation, we want that open scholarship in all its forms to be as accessible and useful as possible. And access to content is the start, but it isn't the end. Open data is a really important component, but it is an area where some publishers are pushing forward and others have a variety of challenges in bringing open data into their publications. So OASPA supports Make Data Count, and I'm really pleased that we can begin our collaboration in this way. And what we really want from this session is to have an exchange of experiences and approaches. So Johannes will later on present a case study from Copernicus, but we'd also love to hear from you all out there on your successes, progress and challenges, so we can inform our next steps on how to help you overcome those challenges with resources or other support. As with the early days of open access, doing something is better than deliberating about it for a long time and doing nothing. So please do add your comments and thoughts to the chat as we go along. I hope you'll feel comfortable in sharing your thoughts and experiences. And as Chloe said at the beginning, you can add any questions that you have to the chat, to the Q&A, sorry, and we'll have time for those later on. So to kick things off, we've got two polls for you. So the interactive start for this, initially to get a sense of who we have here in the audience, and importantly, what your interest is. So Chloe, if you could launch the first one, please. So for this one, you have to choose one of these. Which kind of organisation do you work for? So that seems to be slowing down. So we do have a lot of library representatives today from academic institutions, and a good amount of publishers as well. So again, I hope you'll be willing to share your thoughts and comments with us as we go along. And welcome to those in research institutions and service providers too. So the next question we have for you is, why did you come along today? So what's your interest in data citation? Great, thank you everybody. So it looks like we've got lots of people who want to learn more about data citation and hear about what others are doing in this area as well. We will now, I will introduce our first speaker. Daniella Lowenberg is our first panelist for today, and I said my notes were going to be a problem having three separate pages. Daniella is based at California Digital Library. She's currently product manager for Dryad. She's co-chair of the Force 11 Research Data Publishing Ethics Group, and she's also principal investigator for the Sloan Foundation funded Make Data Count initiative, which of course she's representing today. And Daniella is going to give us a picture of where things stand with data citation and why this initiative is so important So Daniella, the floor is yours.
Alrighty, so thanks everyone so much for joining us, and thank you to OASPA for having us. As Claire mentioned, I'm based at the California Digital Library, and I'm joined here today by Rachael Lammey of Crossref, as we are representing the Make Data Count initiative. So we often talk in this space about how open access publishing extends to data, and this value proposition uptake has been seen with the increase in data policies at publishers. But if we really do value data, we need to be including the evaluation of data in our publishing priorities. So Make Data Count is a collaborative of organizations and folks dedicated to the development of open data metrics. We are an overarching initiative that campaigns for the adoption of the building blocks for responsibly created metrics. So we build and advocate for best practices, like for data citation and reuse with Scholix and the Counter Code of Practice for research data. And we build supporting infrastructure at open infrastructure at organizations like Crossref, DataCite, and CDL. We also have a team of researchers and bibliometrics through Ottawa and ZBW that are working with us to understand how data are reused and attributed across various disciplines. So our goal overall is to inspire change across ScholComm's communities to build towards open, responsible data metrics, and we aim to be a resource for these implementations. But today we're going to specifically focus on data citations and thinking about the publisher's role here, though I know there's many stakeholders on the call. I know Johannes and Catriona are going to dive into this a bit more, but I want to focus on what we see as the publisher's role. So we believe that it's very important that publishers start to prioritize data citations. So what does that all mean? 3 points. The first is that data citations should be thought about in addition to, and even maybe more importantly, than a data availability statement. The second point is that researchers should be told to cite data when they're submitting manuscripts, and that should be available in the reference lists. And third, and most importantly, that when data citations are included in a manuscript, these need to be marked up and sent to Crossref properly. So what does that look like? Well, here is an example of an article that's near and dear to our initiative. And you can see here that when the authors went to write this, they did put a citation to the data in the reference list. The DOI for the data set is there. But when we go over to the data set, if we were to click on citations, this is a screenshot from Dryad, we do a call to Crossref's event data service, and it shows us that there's 0 citations. So when we look in the Crossref metadata, we saw that actually the citation was stripped. And so this never actually made it to Crossref, even though the authors think that they did it properly. It's here, the human eye can see it. Regardless of that, that citation is not usable. That citation is not findable. It's not countable. And so it really is a dead end for that. And so that example is really not a one-off. So this is data that DataCite pulled in April, and it doesn't represent all data citations out there, but it does represent all the citations that we can find right now. So the top number shows the data citations that are declared by repositories to DataCite through relationship types in their metadata. And the third row are data citations declared by publishers to Crossref through references. Clearly, there are millions of these data citations that are out there, but the ones that are declared and findable are awfully low. And these numbers are also not completely representative because they're also missing the biomed non-DOI citations. But I'm showing this not to just acknowledge the lack of participation and the need for participation by publishers, but also what happens when we don't have these in a findable way. When they're not accessible, we can't build on them for networks of citations. We can't understand how many citations exist, so we can't build on them for evaluation. So we really need participation now and have this consistency in our approach, supporting the proper best practices for data citations, including sending them to Crossref and DataCite. So in general, our infrastructure is going to continue to improve. Use cases are going to continue to evolve, and bibliometricians that are working with us are going to continue to identify the proper evaluation indicators for data once they can better understand the contextualization of data reuse, especially across disciplines and how that may vary. But we can't really advance these conversations and have data metrics or data evaluation and assessment until the broad community jumps in and starts taking action. So we need publishers to invest in and prioritize data citations as part of your data policies and as your support for open science. And so we can all get moving on this, and the rest of the webinar is going to kind of go through different examples. There's some information here. We will show a slide at the end that has direct more resources, but you can always go to makedatacount.org or check out our Twitter, and that gives some more information on our perspective and resources at Crossref, DataCite, and others that may be helpful. So I'm going to pass it back over. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Daniella. So next, we're going to hear from Johannes Wagner, who is overseeing publication policies and business development at Copenhagens Publications. He's supporting Copernicus in opening up their research data and also involved in shaping Earth System Science Data, one of the major publication data journals in the Earth and environmental sciences. Johannes is going to share experiences from the work Copernicus is doing into implementing data citation and open data as well. So Johannes, it's over to you.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, thank you all for attending today and for the invitation to give in a few slides an overview of what Copernicus has been doing in terms of making data count to stay in a theme. I'll try to keep it brief, and I'll just jump right into it. And I don't know why it's moving here. Oh, let's just do it like this. Okay, Copernicus Publications, just very briefly, we've been an open access, gold open access publisher only since 2001. And very early on, we have always encouraged our authors to submit next to their, well, traditional research paper, anything that revolves around the paper in terms of research output. So anything that some people call non-traditional research output. So we've always asked them, please, alongside your manuscript, give us your code, give us your data, give us your geosamples in our specific community, or code snippets, or you name it. We are very strong in the earth and environmental sciences traditionally, and you'll see that sort of will come up a bit more often. So I can't really speak very much on communities in the biological sciences or medical sciences, but at least for us, I'll give some impressions in the following slides. And all of our journal policies have always included the FOSS 11 principles on data citations. We follow dataset recommendations to have our data citations in the reference lists, just like any other piece of research work. Also, we encourage all our authors to cite their datasets, cite the code properly, like they would any other research object. We also are, which is important for the earth and environmental sciences, are committed to a set of community standards set by COPDES, the Coalition of Publishing Data in the Earth and Space Sciences. So that's just on a side note. So that's all policy. How do we actually do that? So how do we implement that? And there are essentially two routes an author may take. One is that we, upon submission, directly for review actually, we ask our authors, please define what we call assets. Think of it as a supplement plus or a supplement to zero. We ask them, okay, is there any data set? Is there any code? Is there any video you would like to share with us and the reviewers? And it's not just a link. We ask for full reference. We ask for a permanent identifier, bibliographic data. All of that we take into our database in a structured way. And when the article is published, we have it right next to the article on the article's webpage. So you can find the article itself, you'll find the peer review, and you'll find everything that sort of belongs to the paper. And that makes it very easy for us actually to link those research outputs through the related field on Crossref, because we have it all already in the database. We're not doing that properly right now, but it's all there to go for it. The route two is the more, the route you would expect. And that is that we also have our authors properly cite all the data sets they are using in both in text citations, and also we obviously keep it in the reference lists. We put a little markup into the reference. There's a small example here. This is a dataset hosted at Armitsat, for example, and we add a little brackets dataset and the DOI, and for our typesetters to pick up, and for anyone else out there who might not have access to metadata but only finds the PDFs, for them to discern that this is a data citation. And this obviously is also embedded in all the metadata and sent to Crossref and all the other indexing services as well. And that we hope that it's eventually ends up in Scholix and DataCite and all these services. But as I've learned in the preparation of this talk, that's not always working perfectly, but we're on it. And just to give you an idea how this office take this, this is an overview of the percentage of papers published in 2021 that had explicitly data sets defined. So on the left, you see our journals, well, some of our major journals, never mind the journal shortcuts, it doesn't really matter. The point here is that roughly 50% of all the articles that we have published in 2021 had explicitly stated, yes, I do have a data set, I would like to cite it, here's the DOI, here's the reference. And I think that is quite a nice turnout for now. The one outlier is you up there is Earth System Science Data, our data journal, and as you might expect, we have 100% there, and that's I'll touch on that a little bit later. I think one of the central question we are facing when we want to bring people around is one that has already been touched upon, is validation. So how do we certify that a data product is actually a piece of academic work? That's one. And B, how do we give credit to the authors who go through the ordeal of actually preparing such an open data set? That is, look at some of the FAIR recommendations there, making a data set interoperable, making it follow community standards, making it open. That takes work and time and effort, plus any mandates that you may have from journals, repositories, from your funder, you name it. And I think the only way to encourage people to go through that ordeal is by having our office and editors making authors to cite the research data they are using. And therefore establishing a culture of recognition and reward. And regarding the second aspect of validation, quality control, if you want, so one tool, probably not the ultimate tool and certainly not a new tool, is data journals. And I'm just reporting this because it has been so successful in our case. We founded Earth System Science Data in 2012, so let me lie, 2011, 2012. And we see this as a platform for quality control of data sets through a rigorous peer reviews. We ask our reviewers, look at this data set. We publish data descriptions, but look at the data set. Does it have rich metadata, yes or no? Is it open to an extent and usable to an extent that you would use it in your research? We also provide a platform for community feedback through our public peer review. So everyone in that specific community is free to comment on a data set, recommend improvements, or you have it. And through that, it's sort of a trade-off. We offer authors a publication in a well-established, high-impact journal, but in exchange, we ask for very, very high standards when it comes to openness, access barriers, metadata curation. So we go well above most of the FAIR recommendations in Earth System Science Data. So this is the trade-off. People are buying in that case. And it's been very successful. So I think submissions and publications are doubling every year by now. And it has always been our strategy that we would, within the Copernicus portfolio, waive all APCs for Earth System Science Data, sort of in a trickle-down approach. If we could bring in a culture of data citations, show people, yes, these are good products, they're worth citing, maybe this will then infiltrate our more traditional journals to encourage data citations as well. And this has, as you see from the 50% charge I've shown earlier, this has apparently worked out quite well. And I'm not saying this is the only tool to achieve quality, but it certainly is one tool. And yeah, that's that for data journals. I think I'm going to be brief and just wrap up with telling you a little bit what we are going to do next. Right now, most of our review criteria and editorial policies, they touch on traditional aspects, what to look out for in a research manuscript. And we're going to update that very shortly. It's already in the pipeline with us, that we ask our reviewers explicitly have a look at the data sets, have a look, are all the citations there? And we hope, but as you probably all know, the limiting factor is always the time of reviewer. We hope that this will improve the data citation practices outside our data journals as well. I'm right now working on improving how we tag our data citations for Crossref by having those in the related field. Obviously, explicitly, we'll also update our YATS NLM, all our metadata, to have use the tags that are there for data citations and have them spelled out explicitly. And yeah, more generally update our guidance documents for editors and authors that we have in place. Anyway, those are all already very rigorous, but mostly when you want to publish in a data journal, and we're now going to transform this to our more traditional journals as well. And yeah, I think one of the take-home messages I want all of you to have, the tools are already here. So there are a lot of players who provide everything that we need to make data citations a normal part of the of reference lists in all journals. We just need to encourage more people to use these tools. And yeah, I'd end with that. Thanks.
Thank you, Johannes. So next we have Catriona Maccallum. She is Director of Open Science at Hindawi. Catriona is a member of the board of OASPA, and I think it would actually be easier to say what Catriona isn't involved in than what she is. She serves on the European Commission's Open Science Policy Platform, UKRI's Open Access Practitioners Group, the Advisory Board for the Royal Society's Publishing, the Steering Committee for DORA, and a founder of the Initiative for Open Citations. And I think there's some things missed off this list as well. So Catriona, we've just heard the tools are there, but there are clearly a lot of things for publishers to think about. Tell us why publishers should care about open data citation.
Thanks very much, Claire, and I'm delighted to be able to participate in this webinar today. It brings lots of things together that I think are really important. So next slide, please. So this is really what I want to do is just to put a little bit in the sort of global context. So there was a meeting at the Global Research Council with both that was hosted by DORA and actually the Research on Research Institute, which should be included in this slide. And they pick up, one of the things they picked up on was about the COVID pandemic, putting a spotlight on the importance of international collaboration in scientific research and the social impact of research becoming more evident. And basically, there was renewed urgency for funders to come together and reconsider how research is assessed and evaluated. And data and data sets are a fundamental part of that, and part of that evaluation. Even more recently, 193 member states, the members of UNESCO, have got together to talk about open science. And this is really the connection. It's the connection between open access and open science. And in their draft recommendations, which will eventually be ratified, and I think the final version come out in November, they say open access to scientific knowledge includes scientific publications, open research data, open source software and source code, and open hardware. And so if you're interested in open access publishing, you have to be interested in these other outputs and how open access is provided to those other outputs. And also given what GRC said, but also the recommendations out of UNESCO, they talk about, again, what open science some pillars of open science. And this includes promoting the development and implementation of evaluation and assessment systems that improve the way in which scientific outputs are evaluated. So building on initiatives such as DORA, the Leiden Manifesto, responsible metrics, and other things. And also that they should give value to all relevant research activities and scientific outputs, including high quality, fair data and metadata. And this speaks to what Johannes was talking about actually around fair data. But publications also need to be fair. They need to be findable, interoperable, reusable and accessible. And in fact, Ludo Voltman has written a very nice blog post about this that you'll find if you go look for it. I can provide the link later. But also specifically, they encourage publishers and other stakeholders to adopt policies that require and reward open access to scientific knowledge. And that includes publications, data, software, source code, and hardware. And so I think there is a responsibility for anyone who's serious about open access publishing to heed the requirements of funders and institutions from all over the world about what's needed to make scholarly knowledge more open and more collaborative and ultimately more equitable. Next slide, please. And so this is a rather busy slide, but it's just to briefly show that there's a data poses a big missing link for publishers. So when you think about an author preparing a data set or an article draft, the article might go into a preprint repository, data sets could go into all different types of data repositories. What I've done is highlighted here Zenodo and Dryad. They're both general data repositories. They're run on a non-profit basis. And they are adhere to community standards, and Dryad and Zenodo are actually working together. It's a great place. So there is no researcher, if a researcher says there's nowhere to put my data, regardless of whether they're humanities or sciences, you can say there is. It's Zenodo or Dryad. And of course, data repositories assign DOIs through DataCite and others to the data sets. Meantime, the publisher is publishing the published article. You can slightly ignore the green and the grant. It's about the bigger connections here. But what we're missing, next slide please, is both the ability to cite data and the ability to link backwards and forwards between articles and data. And what that gives is, for data citation, that hits a need to start to reward other scholarly outputs beyond publications. And until there is a culture and norm of valuing data, citation is one way to do it. There are other ways. We cannot give that credit to the researchers. But article data linking itself makes discovery and dissemination much easier. Next slide, please. And the benefits are also to publishers as well as to researchers. And so this is a PLOS One article that came out last year that basically said, first of all, if you put in a data availability statement into your papers, if you start to mandate it, then data availability statements become very common. They get adopted by researchers if you mandate it. And this is from PLOS and BMC, analysis of PLOS articles in BMC, more than 530,000. But importantly, of those, we've heard from both Johannes and Daniella, the data availability statements that actually provide a link to data are only a fraction of a total. About 20% of PLOS articles, 12% of BMC articles in this analysis contained a link to the data. But those articles that do include statements that link to data in a repository can have up to a 25% higher citation impact. So there's not just a benefit to authors. If you're going to be really selfish about this, it's a benefit to publishers and to institutions and funders. Their work gets seen and noticed more. Now, I know this is a data availability statement. So next slide, please. But in some ways, what we're talking about here is the entire sort of data policy landscape. And this is, I'm reflecting, this slide reflects work from E&H and others about developing a research data policy framework for all journals, and Helena Cousin and others, and including Emma Ganley, who I think is on our participant lists, about how you might implement a data citation roadmap as a publisher. But to ensure data citation happens consistently, and data citation should be part of any policy, it does require additional effort from authors and editors, actually, and reviewers as well. And it will increase operational costs. You just can't get around this. There will be an increase in operational costs. But it enhances reader and use experience by consistently linking important research outputs together. And so any data policy, whether and a policy which ideally will include both a data sharing statement, but also explicitly a data citation policy, should enable authors to cite data sets in the reference lists. So rather than stripping out, and I think many publishers actually strip out data set citations from reference lists, or vendors do, they need to actually be put back in. I think one of the things we could talk about is the need for publishers perhaps to leave reference lists well alone, but that's perhaps another discussion. But publishers need to state explicitly how data should be cited. There's a lot of awareness raising and education around this. Next slide, please. And just to show you that no one's perfect, this is Hindawi, and we've got more than 80,000 works listed by DataCite Commons. They link off to Crossref, so those are all our articles. And according to their DataCite Commons yesterday, we only have 10 data sets linked to in DataCite. So there's a long way to go for every publisher, even those publishers who want to do really well. It's, you know, it's not straightforward, it's discipline specific. Next slide, please. So in relation to how you develop policies, I mean, I think that the next thing is publishers actually have to be aware that they need a data citation policy and a data sharing policy, and then they need to start to align and increase the adoption of them. And so they need to first develop data policies which explicitly ask authors for a data availability statement, specify a policy for data citation and credit. And I also think they should link researcher data sharing policies with publisher metadata sharing policies. And that for these links really to be discoverable and for the research outputs to be discoverable, we don't just need open access to the text or the data sets, we also need open metadata about those research objects. And then the aim really to reduce the burden on researchers and try and harmonize those data policies across publishers so we can meet the expectations of funders and governmental bodies like UNESCO. I would also suggest that publishers should make their policies public and register them if possible. And really importantly, publishers need to collaborate to align data policies and standards with other stakeholders in the field. And these include institutional repositories, funders, institutions. What are the standards that are needed? And these are already being done. There are groups driven by, for example, the Research Data Alliance. There's a funder group. There's a policy standardization group. There's a fair sharing working group, which is to identify the key features to describe data repositories. And this is, again, ultimately, you know, we don't want researchers to have to do different things every time they submit to a different journal. We need to start to align, and we need to align across the community. Publishers shouldn't be doing things in isolation. Next slide, please. And I'm just going to also flag fair sharing here, because this is a website where publishers and others can register their data sharing policy. And it's important to in a way, to register, because this makes the policy at fair sharing, they make the policy discoverable, citable, transparent, and comparable to one another. And as a resource and an educational resource, they also can link out. This is a graph from the COVID Rapid Review Initiative, and this basically shows in the green the publishers who are involved in that initiative, and all the standards and data repositories. The repositories are in orange that those publishers connect to one way or another. There's lots out there. There's a huge amount of work to be done. It's not necessarily going to be easy, but the first thing is to get a policy in place and start encouraging and implementing that policy. Final slide, please. And this is why OASPA supports Make Data Count, because ultimately we need to make data be valued, at least, if not more so, than publications. And I think also from the COVID pandemic, we have seen, and people complained about this, the sort of vast flood of low quality preprints and all of that sort of thing. I mean, preprints have been amazing as a way to get information out fast, but we've also seen major papers at major journals being published and then having to be retracted because the data are not available. So this education around data reviewing and editing and making that available at every step of the sort of scholarly comms workflow, from the researcher submitting a grant to the publisher making that publicly available. Many thanks.
Thank you, Catriona. So we do have some time for some questions now, and we're also going to be joined by Rachael Lammey, who Daniella mentioned is involved as well in Make Data Count. Rachael is also head of special programs at Crossref and an all-round whiz with identifiers and data citation. Catriona, I have a question. I'm going to be cheeky and get my own question in first, but just linking on from what you've said there, you know, I know a lot of OASPA members are very small publishers, and what do you think OASPA can do to help? I can't envisage all of our members have somebody spare they can put in these Research Data Alliance working groups. How can OASPA help with, you say there's a need for standardizing, and I totally appreciate that it's definitely better if everybody is asking authors for the same thing, but how can OASPA help that, coordinate that for small publishers in this partnership with Make Data Count?
Well, I think hosting webinars like this is a good way to start, raising awareness. This is a real problem because there are many small publishers and scholar publishers, and if you go to the DOAJ, there are hundreds of very small publishers who are struggling even to make their articles open access, let alone provide the infrastructure and all the metadata and linking for the articles. There are even some journals now that are actually still in print, which is amazing because they might as well be in the basement. So there's a vast range, and I think OASPA's role is, in a way, to provide resources and provide the means for those scholar publishers and smaller publishers to get access to information they need. And then I think there needs to be a serious question about how the funding for infrastructure, if open science is to be a reality, how that support and financing for infrastructure is made. And I think a lot of these small publishers and you can also, it's the same with institutions, that they don't necessarily have the infrastructure to do this. There needs to be financial support somehow put in that, and it may have to come from the bigger players, the Western players. The whole issue around equity in both the infrastructure as well as open access is a huge problem here. I know, even getting a DOI from Crossref costs money. So, you know, and it's an issue. It's a big issue.
Thank you. So just having a look at the questions that have come in so far. So the first one we've had, is there an easy link to share for Copernicus documentation on dataset reviewing best practices and guidance docs for editors/authors, Johannes?
Yes, thank you for that question. As I said, we don't really have that in too deep detail for all the normal journals, but what I can share with you is for our data journal, an editorial and also all our guidelines, which are transferable, I guess, in general to a more broader use case. I'll put that in a chat, I guess, or in a type answer. Okay, I'll put that in chat. I'll just post some DUIs. And then what I'll do is I'll register right away our policies, as Catriona just said.
Thank you. We just to say, we will share all of the slides and further reading afterwards as well through the original blog post. So you will be able to pick up all of this stuff afterwards. The next question is kind of more of a statement. Catriona's recommendation for aligning publishers and repositories to support data citation is the focus of a project that NISO is planning to develop a standard. NISO project is in very early days, but will need volunteers to help. So call out for volunteers there, if anybody wants to step forward for that.
I think this reflects the fact that there's so much happening in this space, and I think there's a huge amount of work being done, and so it's great that NISO are doing this. And I'm sure we could ask people like Emma to talk about, Emma Ganley is one of the participants, to talk about other things. There's loads of initiatives like Daniella mentioned about Force and things, but often it's the same people operating, doing things, and we actually need to expand it and broaden that out and include a range of stakeholders. One of the best initiatives recently was the Enabling Fair Data initiative run by the AGU, which looked at data citation and data sharing for all environmental, earth and space sciences.
Yeah, and if I can jump in just quickly, I know that the NISO proposal was shared with some folks in the Scholix working group, which is part of RDA, which Crossref works on with DataCite. So I think a good thing is that, as you said, the different initiatives are, I think it's key that that we're all sort of talking to each other in this space, so that we don't reinvent the wheel, as Catriona said, so that there's a breadth of stakeholders involved. And I think to the earlier point about OASPA as well, as I said, we are keen to, certainly from the metadata perspective, to figure out, look, if there are areas where publishers are struggling with this, then we can work with them to create sort of tools, services, documentation that can help as well. So I just wanted to add that in.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think, Catriona, you're right, that work is going on, really important work going on in certain places, and I it's great for OASPA to be able to help sort of pass that information on to smaller publishers and help raise awareness in this way, and we'll continue to do that for all of these kind of issues.
I also think, for the larger publishers who don't know about this and have the capacity to implement it, that there's a really clear motivation to do that. And as Johannes said, the tools are in place. It can be done. It's just a matter of making it a priority.
The next question we have, where data citations are displayed in reference lists, should they be highlighted differently or displayed separately to normal citations? And if so, is there an example site where this is done well?
I can speak to that a little bit. I know that some publishers do specifically split out citations to data into like their own kind of separate sections. I guess maybe I'm quite lucky from the Crossref perspective that from our side of things, it doesn't matter. They can just go into reference lists. I think one of the links that will be shared at the end will show how to do that. But from our perspective, if they come into the metadata, if there's identifiers associated with them in the citation information that folks send across ref, then that's enough for us.
can I chip in? I know there's a discussion about this, because if you separate off references to data sets, it can look as though they're second-class citizens in a way. In terms of the signal it potentially sends to researchers. I mean, I think there's a lot of standards and things that need to and community norms that need to be developed, because you know, there are DOIs for data sets, but in the biomedical sciences there's accession numbers. They just go into the main text. So you know, there's a lot of differences in community norms. And I noticed that one of participants is looking at linguistics data. So I have no idea how linguistics data is treated, for example. So, you know, I think, again, this is why having those stakeholders and having people from different communities talk about this. But what we don't want is data to be somehow seen as inferior to the publication.
We had somebody in the last webinar, a digital humanities researcher, was talking about different data as well. So I agree with you, Catriona. It's good to hear about all the different perspectives on data in different disciplines. The next question relates to resources. And so this is great, but if we wanted to get more educated on data policies, what other resources or courses can you recommend? Rachel, I know you're going to mention resources at the end. Do you want to answer that now, or is that something that you want to come back to?
No, well, I think the again, one of the what comes to mind initially, so the data citation roadmap for scholarly publishers, and I think a couple of people already pointed to that in their slides. But again, there was an RDA working group that was working on sort of aligning data citation policies and data policies among publishers, so that each individual publisher doesn't have to reinvent the wheel on these. So there should be a link to that in the slides, but if not, we can send that on to you. But instead, I think that those are sort of, there are various, I guess, kind of like tiers is the best way that I can describe it, in terms of the extent to which the policies require different criteria or different steps related to data. And I find those quite helpful, rather than having to kind of start from scratch with it.
Thanks. So next questions. Great. Thanks everybody for all the questions that are coming in. There was just one for a while and I was getting a bit worried, but there's loads now. If we don't get through them all, we'll follow up with these on the blog post as well. How are policy developers approaching citation practices regarding data sets, qualitative as well as quantitative, that restrict or condition researcher access? Who would like to answer this one?
I can comment on that, but I think Bernie wants to start, maybe, you know.
I think Bernie's helping with marking the ones we've done.
So what we do at Copernicus, we have this two-step approach where you can define so we allow restricted access to data sets in papers, but only for the duration of review, as long as you provide access for the reviewers. But then all authors know that ultimately, as soon as publication comes along, they need to open this data set. So we sort of follow a two-stage approach in that regard. I don't know how other publishers handle this in general. I do not think it's a good idea to, I mean, you're talking about restriction for researchers, but we go even a bit further. Sometimes we don't allow non-commercial licenses. We don't allow SA licenses. So we are rather strict in that regard, but we have some leeway. If you don't want to publish your data set right away because you fear data theft or whatever, then we allow to restrict this only for reviewers and editors. But you, at the very end, you need to sort of open it all up for publication. That's Copernicus policy, at least. I don't know if there's another, anyone else who wants to comment on that.
Can I just add something about the sort of general repositories like Dryad and Zenodo are also, and Daniella can also speak to this, there's a feature where you can basically expose the data just to the reviewers and the editors and keep it private. There's also issues around confidential data that has to be patient ID, or and that has to be dealt with like all sensitive data in terms of that. But there are ways to get around this. I think it's important when you look at a data repository to see whether there are these features available to review the data, and that sort of safeguards the sort of concerns that some researchers might have about sharing data or too early. Daniella, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think I would also just add in, unrelated, that regardless of how open or closed a data set is, if it has a persistent identifier, it can be cited. And so even if it's going to be restricted access, but the metadata is available and there's a citation to it, it should be cited and included in the references.
Thanks. I think we have time for at least one more question. What actions should publishers prioritise for domains where there isn't a culture of data sharing? For example, should we be encouraging data citation where there simply isn't any deposited data to cite, or where the culture is still to present information in PDFs and figures as part of the traditional model? Anybody got any thoughts on that?
I'd say share this webinar.
Yeah.
Catriona slides that there is benefit from. I mean, there are always repositories out there for any type of data set, and just get it started.
I think it's such a chicken and egg, because traditionally no one has valued these data sets. So why should researchers take an interest in citing them? So how does that change? And I think publishers do have a role here in helping researchers cite data where they can, and helping to enable researchers to cite data to break that link and to show that data sets are valuable. I think what would be interesting is there are some disciplines which don't even think they have data, let alone want to cite it. So, again, what is data? What are data? And what does it mean? I think the digital humanities are very clear and really progressive in terms of data sharing and how they manage their data. So some of the social sciences, but other parts of humanities and social sciences don't think about their work in terms of data, whether it's qualitative or quantitative. And I think so there's a huge amount of awareness raising here as well.
So we have 2 more polls to do. I'm thinking we should probably end the questions there. And as I said, we will answer all of these. The panelists will answer these, and we'll share those on the website as well. So we will get to all of those and share all of the slides from this too. Rachel, do you want to finish by talking about resources? I know you have one more slide to show.
So as I said, again, these will be shared alongside the and we'll also collate some of the other links that were shared during the course of the webinar. It's that the data citation roadmap comes up a lot, the Force Declaration of Data Citation Principles. And Emma, I know that you noted in the chat that there's also work going on around software citation, which is obviously complementary to this as well, which is great. So these are some useful resources, but as I said, in terms of the response to the polls, we know that there might be more that we can create as a community to be able to support this. So I think thanks to all the people who've been involved in creating these resources so far, and if there's more that we can do, then we should.
I just noticed that there's links to other resources coming in the chat and things, and the NISO standard was flagged. It'd be lovely to have, if participants contribute what they know about what's going on, that'd be a way to highlight them too.
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to going through all of these afterwards. But yeah, please do send those in, or contact us afterwards here at OASPA and send us anything to follow up. And with that, I'll close this for today, but thank you all so much out there for joining us in this webinar and for participating and putting in comments and questions and responding to the polls. It's really appreciated. Thank you so much to our wonderful panelists for making time for this today, and to Bernie for everything she's doing behind the scenes. And wish you all a very good rest of the day wherever you are in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye for now. Come back to more webinars from OASPA.